The Foreign Service is about 15,000 men and women, most of them in the Department of State, another large number working for the U.S. Agency for International Development, a few in the Department of Commerce, some in the Department of Agriculture, some working in international broadcasting, but most of them in the Department of State. That number includes Foreign Service officers or generalists, what many people think of when they think of a diplomat. There are about 8,000 of them, and specialists, people who handle communications, medical work, and all sorts of support services for the entire American community overseas. The Foreign Service works abroad, as you can tell from the name. They spend about 2/3 of their career overseas, 1/3 in Washington. They work in three different areas: what I call representation, operations, and policy. Representation is conveying U.S. policies and U.S. views to foreign audiences. It's a task that has to be done accurately and lucidly and persuasively. In the other direction, representation is reporting what foreign societies want to transmit to the United States. Their official views, their unofficial sentiments, their politics, their economics. It's negotiating agreements, big agreements, little agreements. Negotiation is something that diplomats do every single day. And it's just being an official American overseas. When you work for the U.S. government and you're living abroad, you walk down the street, you engage with the society, and the way you behave represents the United States. If you treat people with respect, that's noticed. If you treat people disrespectfully, that's really noticed. And that's representation. Operations, a more and more important part of what the Foreign Service does. Operations includes carrying out U.S. policies, administering U.S. laws like the visas, issuing the visas and denying visas to those who don't deserve them. It includes running programs, foreign assistance programs, programs like the President's emergency program for AIDS relief to help prevent the spread of disease. It includes administering contracts. We use a great many contractors abroad, drawing up those contracts, and then monitoring the performance. That's a large part of diplomacy today. That's operations. People who do work, I should add, in disaster relief or are working in combat zones like Iraq and Afghanistan, near combat zones. That's also operational, hands-on work, and it's much more important now than it was, say, 30 years ago, when diplomacy was suit and tie rather than combat boots. Well, then there's policy. This is what Foreign Service people, particularly at the senior level, bring to the political leadership. Advice and recommendations for which they have unique qualifications to provide. They have a knowledge of the motivations and the levers of power in foreign countries. At least after experience and training, after 20 years, you understand these things. Foreign Service people at the senior levels have a very good sense of what the range of possibilities is in any negotiation. What are the possible outcomes and how to get there? They have an ability to predict foreign reactions to changing circumstances. And they have, and this is something that Foreign Service people probably uniquely have. They have a sense of what resources, human resources, financial resources, physical resources, and time, which in a way is a resource also. What kind of resources are needed to execute any strategy, to carry out a policy, because dreaming up a strategy is easy, but carrying it out, executing, is difficult, and it has to be properly resourced. What are those resources? Foreign Service people have a pretty good sense of what you need to have on hand to accomplish the goals and the strategies that you set out at the political level.
And just to give a few more concrete examples about what the Foreign Service does, as my colleague said, 2/3 of the Foreign Service are overseas, and that's where the fun is. That's where the fun of being in the Foreign Service is. And for example, Foreign Service consular officers visit Americans, who are in jail overseas or who need help, and interview visa applicants who want to come to the U.S. to visit Disneyland or whatever, and add to our economy. Public diplomacy officers in the Foreign Service tell America's story to local audiences to try to help them understand us and hopefully build support for U.S. government policies. Economic officers, which I was, and my colleague also, help American business overseas. An American business person gets in trouble in a strange country with a strange language and a very strange legal system. The Foreign Service officers who have contacts and who know their way around, who speak the language, can help them out. Political officers, Foreign Service political officers, for example, when the U.S. military, after 9/11, needed to go into Afghanistan to take out the Taliban, the first step was to get landing rights in neighboring countries, and that's the work of the U.S. embassies in those countries and the Foreign Service officers that are negotiating access so U.S. Forces could move through there to take out the Taliban. So there are a lot of concrete, and of course back in the U.S., 1/3 of the Foreign Service is, we do a lot of policy things. Foreign Service officers work on the National Security Council staff. They go on detail to be political advisors to generals and different divisions and military commands.
Well, the first thing is this cover. If you're shopping for this book, look for the map. The two earlier editions, 2008 and 2011, had eagles on the cover. You want the map, the 2017 edition. What's different? Some things the book is about the same length as the earlier editions. Some things have been cut back. Some things have been added. There is less in this book, for example, about serving in Iraq or in provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan. And my colleague John here was in fact the head of a provincial reconstruction team in Iraq. And that kind of activity is fading a little bit into the past. So we spend some time on it, but not as much. And there's more attention paid to the role of the Foreign Service in interagency affairs, where the Department of State is often charged with coordinating activities among the many U.S. agencies, and there are more than 50 of them that have representation overseas, working with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Trade Representative, the Treasury Department, whoever it might be. It's a difficult role to play, partly because other agencies tend to have bigger budgets and more resources than the agencies where the Foreign Service people work. So coordinating policy is quite a challenge. It takes certain, what should I say, a diplomatic skill. And we talk a lot about that in the third edition. Those are some of the key changes. We also note where things appear to have changed but haven't really. There are a lot of changes in vocabulary when when an administration turns over. Under President George W. Bush and Secretary Rice, there was a lot of talk about expeditionary diplomacy, the kind of things that were done in Iraq and Afghanistan. But under President Obama and Secretary Clinton, they talked instead about diplomacy, development, and defense, 3Ds. Turned out there wasn't that much difference between the two approaches, but the vocabulary was quite different. This book was completed in manuscript before the 2016 election. So we're not talking here about changes in vocabulary in the administration of President Trump and Secretary Tillerson. That is, for better or worse, not covered in the third edition.
That said, this book really does completely update the information on the hiring process for the Foreign Service, and then once you get in, what's the tendering process with the promotion, the career track. And none of that has changed under President Trump yet, and it's not clear that it will. I mean, things have slowed down, promotions, assignments, but the underlying mechanisms are the same. And I've recently retired, and my last job was an office director in the Bureau of Human Resources, and I've been on 2 Foreign Service promotion panels and have a lot of background. So I was able, working with my colleague, to get this really updated. And there's a lot of really hard facts in here that are really they're unclassified, but they're not public. So we have up-to-date information about diversity in the Foreign Service, the hardship service, how many of the posts are unaccompanied, things like that. So in that respect, it's really completely updated.
By updated, it's updated into early 2017.
Right.
The data is 2016. So it's quite current.